Hello out there and welcome back to another steaming pile of fresh meat.
Why do you always call it a steaming pile?
Do I?
You do.
Because it is one. No, it's not. I'm so mean to us. Tristan Ogilvie here alongside the lovely Luce O'Brien.
Hello, Tristan.
And this week for Fresh Meat, we thought we'd turn our gaze to an industry in crisis. And not a dino crisis, unfortunately. That would be cool.
Unfortunately.
The Japanese horror, or specifically Japanese horror video games. And we're going to take a look at sort of the past, present, and future.
Yep.
Maybe also known as the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Very nice.
But Lucy, what do we mean when we talk about Japanese horror?
Well, yeah, I mean, it serves to define what Japanese horror actually is, because to state the obvious, it's horror that comes from Japan. But it also has a very distinctive flavour.
Yep.
So Japanese horror has traditionally always been about the abstract, about like psychological horror, and less about going in with guns blazing and chopping off heads, and more about sort of things that you couldn't see, you know, like focused on psychosis and
Yep.
dark memories and family secrets
Yep.
and all that sort of thing. And also they traditionally feature a sort of idiosyncratic awkwardness.
Yep.
I think thanks to Japan's cultural differences and,
Absolutely.
you know, the sort of poor translation. So in many regards, you know, in many ways, Japanese sort of horror is very much a product of the past.
Let's talk about it because, I mean, Japanese horror, as far as video games are concerned, really bloomed at the advent of the 32-bit era when everything went 3D. You know, particularly with the PlayStation, original PlayStation, you know, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Clock Tower, Parasite Eve, all these games that really sort of came to the fore during that time. And as you've mentioned, it was very much, it wasn't so much about gameplay mechanics, but just more about horror and creepiness and just sort of general evasion more than confrontation and escaping the horror. And
That's it. I mean,
yeah.
you know, obviously there was the term survival horror that was born from that golden age, but it was very Japanese, and yeah, you know, to a certain degree, as you say, it was because there were certain technical limitations and sort of things like, okay, let's hide our monsters in the corner and build these incredible sort of, I mean, it's that perfect sort of thing of horror of working within your limitations. And I think that's why games like Silent Hill were just so wonderful, because they were janky, they were clunky and awkward and all that sort of thing, but that's what made them so scary.
Yeah,
and the focus,
unnerving.
That's right, and the focus was so much more on the horror and less on the game.
Yep.
Which was wonderful.
But then of course Shinji Mikami, who created the genre sort of, well, certainly brought it to the fore with Res Evil, then flipped that on its head with Res Evil 4, and it was kind of, even though that game was amazing and is widely regarded as one of the greatest action horror games ever, still, kind of was I don't want to say the beginning of the end, but it was kind of a definite shift as far as Japanese horror games are concerned.
It definitely was. I mean, and also by the time that Resident Evil 4 came around, these horror games weren't selling as well as they used to, and all of a sudden Res Evil 4 came along and just spun just mega bucks, and everything changed, and people couldn't ignore it.
Yeah. And so all the games started becoming more gamey, more sort of action-focused, more action horror than survival horror, I suppose. And the other big Japanese franchises followed suit.
If you look at, like, for example, if you go back and look at Silent Hill Homecoming, which came after Resident Evil 4, I mean, obviously they introduced this really, like, sort of fresh new focus on combat. Which Silent Hill was never about. Silent Hill was never about combat at all. Silent Hill was about, you know, the dark monsters of the mind. It wasn't about health meters and, you know, it was very much a a horror experience rather than a horror game.
Yeah, and that was also around the time, certainly for, as far as Silent Hill is concerned, where they started outsourcing development
That's right.
out of Japan,
Yeah.
Which obviously doesn't help when you're trying to make a Japanese horror game, it doesn't help when you're getting non-Japanese people to produce it.
Yeah.
And that sort of brings us up to where we are at the moment.
Yeah, so what has happened now? I mean, we're at the stage with Japanese horror where we just haven't really, I mean, it's just not happening.
Yeah.
It's really not happening,
Yeah.
and there are many reasons for this. I mean, one of the most obvious ones is that the West has become the driving economic cultural force in the games industry, and this means Western sensibilities have become the norm. So
across all genres.
Across all genres,
Yeah.
and so we're not. The horror games of yore, which were the things that go bump in the night, are no longer what's in fashion. It's no longer what people want. And obviously, as the industry has grown, it's become bigger and more unwieldy. And it's become, as a result, like extremely risk averse, like crazy risk averse.
Yeah.
To make a successful AAA game now, the budgets have to be huge, and therefore games have to be a safe bet. So AAA, like horror in general, is barely feasible.
Yeah, yeah.
These games will never be blockbusters. I mean, it's the same model, and you see the same model in film, but it's far more feasible in film to make a horror film on a low budget and push it out and make the money back. But these, Saw 7 is never going to make as much money as Age of Ultron. It's just it will never happen. Horror is not a blockbuster genre.
No.
And it's not a blockbuster genre in the game space either. So the idea of abstract Japanese horror, one that isn't about gunning down zombies, is even less feasible.
Yeah.
Also, we've lost all our Japanese auteurs. I mean,
big time, yeah.
That's one thing that is really sad. And you sort of look back at the golden age of survival horror and just game making in Japan during the 90s into the early 2000s as well. And a lot of those games were headed by these just geniuses, these crazy wild geniuses who were given free reign of these projects.
Yeah.
Guys like Shinji Mikami, for example, and obviously Hideo Kojima.
Yeah. And that sort of brings us around to something that we've touched on in Fresh Meat previously, but the real tragedy of Silent Hills. Silent Hills is non-birth or stillbirth, or I don't actually. This is gross.
Well, stillbirth is fitting,
Let's go with that.
considering the content in PT.
You remember, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But
so it was left in a sink somewhere.
It's not exactly. It's left in a dirty sink. But yeah, I think in many ways, Silent Hills really felt like it was the saving grace of Japanese horror. Like it gave people. I mean, PT was such a success, and it was so brilliant in so many ways, and it had people talking and theorizing and doing all those things that we used to do with those old, survival horror games, with those old Japanese games. And so, the fact that it was just nipped in the bud and then kind of just run over by a train by Konami is a total tragedy, and it really feels like a blow. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this today, because I feel personally like Japanese horror has, horror in video games has sort of never felt more obtuse to me right now.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the future.
Well, I mean, it's Silent Hills was the shining light, as you've just said, on the horizon as far as Japanese horror is concerned, and now that it's been extinguished, it's a pretty dark horizon. I mean, I did a bit of research coming into this video and I got to be honest with you, if you try and find upcoming J-horror games, it's you got to go through a lot of Google pages to find any matches. So I've got a bunch here that I've found, including Night Cry, which is made by Play Sim Games. This is an indie studio formed by Hifumi Kono, who was the creator of Clock Tower, one of the games from the glory days, and Takashi Shimizu, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, director of The Grudge. So it's a pretty good pedigree behind this game. The game was actually Kickstarter funded, well, certainly part of it was. It looks really old school, looks really kind of classic, and when I say that, I'm sort of praising it with...
so praising it and condemning it at the same time.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, you know, the graphics look very much last gen.
Well, that's an interesting question though. Like, you know, we don't have a hell of a lot of time to go into too much depth here, but you know, there's an argument to be made that Japanese horror has just simply grown old, and it's past its welcome now. Now that we've got the means in which to create these far more detailed and sort of fluid worlds, is there room for the sort of clunky everyman? And I would actually argue yes, because PT, I believe, showed us that there was a way in which you could still be a vulnerable protagonist set, and you could sort of be placed in this world of psychosis and fever dreams, and it would still work on a PlayStation 4, for example. It
did have photorealistic graphics, though. I mean, it's part of the problem with this Nightcry is that, it looks like at best a PS2 game,
right?
Which kind of kills it a little bit. Right down to the really crummy sort of fonts for the subtitles and things, like this weird, like old, you know, Times New Roman or something for the fonts and stuff. It just looks old. But I do really like the design of the villain in that game, who's got these giant kind of gardening shear things, and he chases you, and the emphasis is on running and hiding, not on, because you can't confront him.
So like Clock Tower, like Scissorman. And
pretty much.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, I mean, that looks quite cool. Obviously, we've seen Mikami set up Tango Gameworks, I should say.
Yeah.
Evil Within and its DLC episodes is done, but you know, hopefully he continues on.
Well, I mean, at this point, Shinji Mikami is honestly the only kind of big name working under a big studio, working in Japanese, like in the Japanese horror genre. Well, in the spirit of Japanese horror, under Bethesda. I mean, that's huge. Yeah. And I really do hope that they become a dedicated horror studio.
Well, I mean, that would definitely be playing to his strengths, right? I mean, fingers crossed. Speaking of names, though, there's also Suda51 who's making Let It Die, but of course, Suda51, even though his games are kind of tinged with horror, they've never really been... well, certainly these last few games, Lollipop Chainsaw, Shadow of the Damned, stuff like that, very much action-driven. Let It Die looks very much the same. Doesn't look like it's that scary, just a bit kind of over the top and ridiculous.
Yeah.
Probably have a lot of phallic gun names and things.
That's what we were all looking for.
Fingers crossed. And then, of course, there's Fatal Frame 5, which is already out in Japan on the Wii U. Came out, I think,
last year.
Yeah. On the way for a Western release later this year. Looks quite interesting. I mean, you know, using the Wii U gamepad as a camera is a cool concept. So that could be good. I think the Japanese reviews were kind of middling. I don't think it was like the heralded as like the resurgence of the series or anything like that. So yeah, the future is not too bright.
The future at this point of the Japanese games industry is very bleak in general. I mean, we're sort of looking at a whole space where consoles aren't selling very well, where like everyone's where Konami's making money in the mobile space and in these like bizarre gambling machines that like we just can't comprehend because they're just so Japanese. It's not a great time to be making big budget video games in Japan right now.
No.
So I suppose like the only answer that we can kind of come to sort of the conclusion is that people just have to go independent. I mean that's it. Like you've just got to do it on your own dime. If you're an auteur, you've got to do it on your own dime because studios aren't going to let you have this free reign anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we've seen a massive resurgence of horror come, in the Western world, coming in the independent space, and I've really got my fingers crossed that is something that eventually Japan will tap into as well.
That has been another episode of Fresh Meat. What do you think about sort of Japanese horror and where it's at? Have you unearthed any Japanese horror games on the way that we don't know about?
And more to the point, do you miss it? I mean, I think that's a really interesting question because a lot of us are really tied into nostalgia, especially when it comes to like Silent Hill and the early Resident Evils. Like, there's a big nostalgic pull there.
Yeah.
But is that it? I mean, is that it? Is it just simply nostalgia? Was it just a moment of time? Do we want to see that kind of like eerie sensibilities come back to horror games. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, let us know in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you in another fortnight for another episode of Fresh Meat. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Ah!